Sometimes the loudest silence is the one inside your own home. You brew the same cup of coffee, you stare out the same window, and you wonder, when did I stop being a part of the world? This is a story not about grand miracles, but about how a single kind act, a tree and a letter, can bring someone back from the edge of disappearing. Ben had long given up on birthdays. He wasn't waiting for phone calls or cake. But on one forgotten morning in a mailbox filled with bills and dust, he found something unexpected. A yellow envelope, handwritten, no return address. It began, "Dear Mr. Ben, you may not remember me." The lemon tree letter. Ben Anderson lived at the end of a street no one remembered the name of in a faded beige house. He was 52 years old, retired early from his job teaching literature for health reasons, a polite way to say grief with no diagnosis. Every morning he brewed coffee and stood by the window looking out at an untended garden. Not because he was too busy, but because he no longer had a reason. It had been 5 years since his wife Ellie passed away from cancer, and 3 years since his sister, his closest friend, died in a car accident. Since then, Ben had lived like a shadow of himself. Once he was known for his booming laugh in the teacher's lounge, for playing the piano every afternoon, for teaching students how to journal with their hearts. But piece by piece, something inside him dimmed like a lamp no one came to switch on again. The neighbors still called him Mr. Ben, the teacher. Some remembered how he helped their kids get into college. But lately he only walked the neighborhood in an old coat, eyes always fixed downward. On his birthday that year, he didn't expect anyone to remember. And indeed, there were no messages, no phone calls. Ben wasn't sad. He had grown used to days slipping by as if he no longer existed. But that day something was different. Among the usual stack of bills and advertisements in his old wooden mailbox was a light yellow envelope. No stamp, no printed address, just a handwritten line. To Mr. Ben, the man who helped plant our lemon tree. Ben froze. A lemon tree. His hand trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. "Dear Mr. Ben, you may not remember me. My name is Amelia. 12 years ago, my family moved into 117 Maple Lane. I was just 12. My father had just died. My mother barely spoke. I had no friends, didn't want to live, and trusted no one. That day I was struggling with a small potted plant, a lemon tree I brought home from school. I didn't know how to plant it, how to keep it alive. You saw me and stopped. You didn't ask questions. You just smiled and helped me dig the hole, place the tree, cover the roots, and water it. I never knew why you helped. But to a kid who felt invisible, your kindness was light. I've taken care of that tree every year. It grew with me. Like I was allowed to grow too. Now I'm studying to become a psychologist. And I wanted to write this letter, though it's late, to thank you. For something you may have forgotten. But that saved a part of me. Amelia." Ben read it twice. His eyes weren't blurred from age, but because something had stirred inside him, strangely gentle, slightly painful. He didn't fully remember the moment. Maybe it was instinct. But this letter, arriving on his birthday at a time he felt he'd disappeared from the world, was the one thing that made his heart beat stronger. A lemon tree. A young girl. A thank you 12 years late. Ben sat down in his old armchair, the letter gripped gently in his hands. And in that moment, for the first time in many years, he felt he was still a part of someone's story. Ben placed the letter on the table, right next to his cup of cold coffee. He sat there for hours, no lights, no radio. Just the ticking of the wall clock, like the heartbeat of a house quietly listening. The name Amelia echoed in his mind like a distant chime. A tree. The front yard of 117. He remembered that neighborhood just 4 blocks away. Back then he often took evening walks after teaching, carrying a book or a few bags of groceries. One sunny day he vaguely recalled seeing a small girl struggling with an overwatered pot of soil. But her face... he couldn't remember. Just the bent posture, tiny hands, and a quiet sadness surrounding her. Ben stood up and opened an old box of keepsake student cards, childlike drawings from his pupils, class photos, even a poem one of his students once wrote. "You're like an old tree, patient and still. You stand there each day silent. But when the wind blows through you, it makes me want to grow." Ben chuckled softly. He didn't know which child had written it. But now he felt like that old tree still standing, only no one walked by anymore. The next day, he put on his worn sneakers, a brown coat, and began walking toward number 117. The street had changed. Trees were taller, houses had been repainted, and a few now had electric cars in the driveway. But the house at number 117 was still there. The window frames were still sky blue, and in the front yard, Ben stopped in his tracks. A lemon tree as tall as the second story, with a thick trunk-wide canopy, vibrant green leaves, and full of fruit. This wasn't a decorative plant. This tree had lived taken root, grown tall, and weathered snowstorms and heat waves. Beneath its shade sat a wooden bench. On it a folded book and a still warm cup of tea. "Mr. Ben." The voice came from the doorway, a young woman with neatly tied brown hair and a simple knit coat. Her eyes warm open and full of unspoken emotion. "I'm Amelia," she smiled, walking toward him. "I've been waiting. Wasn't sure you'd come." Ben didn't know what to say. He just stared at the lemon tree. Then back at the girl from years ago, now a grown woman. "I didn't think I had done anything that mattered," he said quietly. To me back then, it meant everything. They sat down on the bench. A breeze passed through the leaves. The lemons swayed gently. Amelia shared that after the day he helped her plant the tree, she began watering it every morning. At first, simply because he had said, "If you care for the tree, it'll remember you." Over time, it became a ritual: step into the yard, touch a leaf, whisper a wish, tell it about school. "It was the first place I felt heard, even if it was just by a tree," she said with a smile. "And you were the first person who didn't ask why I was sad, didn't say, 'Cheer up,' just stood there with me." Ben stayed silent, but something inside him was slowly softening. "I went into psychology because of that moment. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from advice. It comes from someone simply being kind." She stepped inside briefly and returned with a small paper bag. "Lemons from our tree. I thought you should take some. They taste very real." Ben held the bag. The fresh citrus scent filled his breath. He looked up at the tree. Leaves rustled in the breeze. Sunlight filtered through. He whispered, "Maybe. This tree saved me too." Ben brought the bag of lemons home like a treasure. He placed it on the kitchen table, right where Amelia's letter still lay. The scent of lemon filled a kitchen that had for years only smelled of stale coffee and dust-covered books. He sat down and opened a notebook. It was one he used to write in daily, a journal now untouched for years. The first page read, "If someone asks what I'm living for, I'll tell them about Ellie." Near the end was the date Ellie died, just 3 short lines. And after that, only blank pages. Ben picked up a pen. Slowly, carefully, he wrote, "A lemon tree still remembers me." In the days that followed, Ben started walking more. Not just around the block, but further to his old school, a favorite bookstore, the local library. Some places had changed names. Some people were no longer there. But something inside him was shifting. Quietly. Just the feeling that he could still keep walking. He remembered a student named Joel who was terrible at writing essays but always carried a tiny cactus for inspiration. One day Joel had given him that plant. "Take care of it, sir. I'll come back for it when I make it to college." Ben still had that cactus. It had long since dried up and lost its spines. He went out, bought a new pot, new soil, and replanted it. He didn't know where Joel was, but the cactus would live on. He thought of an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rose, who used to make lemon jam from fruit she gathered around the neighborhood. Ben once helped her label the jars. Back then, it felt like nothing. But that day he reopened her recipe, washed his hands, sliced the lemons, boiled the sugar. The scent filled the whole kitchen. Ben brought a jar of jam to the neighbors next door, a young couple with 2 kids. "No special reason," he said. "I just wanted to share." The mother was surprised, then smiled. "The kids will love this." That afternoon, 2 little children knocked on Ben's door with a scribbled drawing. It showed a lemon tree with a caption, "Thank you, Mr. Ben, for food from the tree." He laughed. For the first time in a long time. Ben also started writing letters. Not emails. Real letters, handwritten with an ink pen. One went to a former student, a girl who once drew him standing in a field of flowers. "Thank you for once thinking I was like spring." Another went to the town librarian who had let him read for hours undisturbed. One letter he addressed to himself, age 38, when he still lived with Ellie, played piano in the afternoons, and believed in magic. "Dear Ben, don't think you've disappeared. Everything you've ever done, no matter how small, is budding somewhere. You're not gone. You were asleep, and now you're waking up." He bought a lemon sapling. Didn't plant it yet, just left it on the balcony. Every morning he watered it and said one kind thing to himself. "Today you stepped outside. Today you smiled. Today you are still here." And just like that, the little steps began to fit together. His days were no longer just about surviving. They were starting to feel like living. Ben still missed Ellie. Still cried sometimes when looking at old photos. But the grief no longer felt like a blanket of darkness. Now it felt more like fertilizer for his lemon tree. Strong. Bitter. But necessary for something new to grow. 1 week later, Ben received a message from Amelia. "This Sunday we're having a small afternoon tea under the lemon tree. If you're free, my mom and I would love for you to come." Ben almost declined. Then he looked at the little lemon tree on his balcony. No roots grow strong in isolation. He put on a white shirt, his old leather shoes, and brought a jar of lemon jam. For the second time in his life, he stopped at house number 117. That day, the front yard was bathed in sunlight. A long wooden table sat beneath the old lemon tree covered in a white cloth, ceramic teacups, homemade cookies, and people. Amelia introduced him to her mother, a woman with gentle but world-worn eyes. Then to her neighbors, classmates, and colleagues. Everyone seemed to know the story of the lemon tree and the teacher. "You're Mr. Ben from that famous thank you letter," one woman laughed. Ben blushed. They sat together sharing cookies and stories. Amelia asked, "Do you still teach?" Ben shook his head. "I've been reteaching myself just recently." An older man asked, "What was your favorite assignment to give?" Ben paused, then said, "Every year I'd ask my students to write one small act that changed me." Everyone smiled, then began to share their own little moments: a stranger's smile, a hug in the schoolyard, a coin left on a bench. At the end of the gathering, Amelia handed Ben a framed picture. Inside was a drawing of the lemon tree bathed in sunlight with the words, "A kind act never dies, it just blooms in season." Ben was speechless. He simply hugged her, a long, quiet embrace that reached all the way down to his roots. That evening, Ben returned home. He placed the picture next to his young lemon tree. Then he turned on the balcony. Light sat down and played an old jazz record. A few neighbors walking by looked up. One waved. A child pointed at the tree and giggled. Ben smiled. The door was no longer closed. The next day, Ben brought the lemon sapling to the town library. "I think this place deserves a tree that listens to everyone," he told the librarian. She chuckled. "We'll take good care of it." He suggested, "What if we create a kindness corner? Anyone who waters the tree can write about a small act that once changed them." The idea took root. A week later, 12 notes had been pinned to the board. One read, "I once wanted to give up, but a teacher once said if you care for the tree, it will remember you." Ben began receiving invitations to speak at schools, cafes, senior centers. But he always said, "This isn't a story about how I changed someone. It's about how someone saved me. With a thank you." He didn't try to heal anyone. He simply told the story of a girl, a lemon tree, and a letter. And whenever someone asked, "Why did you start again?" Ben would answer, "Because sometimes all we need is one small reason, not to disappear." 1 year after receiving the letter, Ben stood before the town's bulletin board. His hand trembled slightly as he pinned up a poster. Lemon Tree Day. Plant kindness, harvest healing. He had spent months preparing, applying for sponsorships, buying saplings, and printing small cards with this message. Write down one act of kindness you once received, and pass it on. On the day of the event, the library's backyard was filled with sunlight. Over 40 people came: families, children, students, and elders. Amelia was there helping coordinate. Kids squealed with delight when they saw the tiny saplings. A group of students played soft acoustic music. Those who had heard Ben's story came to plant their own trees. Each person received a pot, a bag of soil, and a card. As they planted, they shared a small moment that had changed their lives. A young boy said, "My mom always puts a candy in my backpack every morning. I've never seen her do it, but it's always there." An elderly man said, "Someone drove me home after I fell off my bike. They didn't ask my name, just said, 'Are you okay?'" Ben stood quietly, his face warm with emotion. When everyone had finished, he invited them to gather beneath the first lemon tree, the one where it all began. He took the microphone, but spoke softly. "I used to think my life had ended when I lost my loved ones. I lived like a tree whose roots had been cut. But one day, I received a letter from a girl thanking me for something I didn't even remember, helping her plant a lemon tree." He looked around, his gaze meeting each person. "I'm not telling this story because I saved someone. I'm telling it because someone saved me with a simple thank you." He bowed his head. A small boy raised his hand and asked, "Why a lemon tree, Grandpa Ben?" Ben smiled, looking up at the green leaves swaying gently above. "Because sometimes a lemon tree can save a heart. Kindness doesn't always arrive through grand gestures. Sometimes it hides in a gentle hand pressing into the soil, a quiet nod to a stranger, or a lemon tree standing quietly in someone's yard, whispering, 'You mattered.'"